Aliens invade Earth. They lose, but it appears humanity accidentally committed some intergalactic war crimes. The invasion failed. That's how the story went. Large regional hegemony in this arm of the galaxy sent their best fleets and armies to conquer the strategically important system of Sol. There are rules that all galactic states adhere to in war, rules to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, to protect civilian life, and to ensure the rights of existence for the losing side. There are a lot of rules. Most races, upon ascending into the great galactic game, already have most or all of them written down and do adhere to them. But the invasion of Sol failed. Not because the Diaxto hegemony was unprepared, not because of foreign intervention, not because the locals were a lot more advanced and powerful than was previously understood. No, the invasion failed because the inhabitants of Sol, the people originating from Sol 3, locally called Terra, broke intergalactic conventions on war. Indeed, they committed numerous intergalactic war crimes. As a matter of fact, they broke them all. The horrors of atomic weaponry were the first to shock the invasion force. What race would be reckless enough to use atomic weapons in their own atmosphere? They lost a good deal of ships that way. The soldiers on the ground were met by fierce resistance, as the local civilians evacuated their cities, went out into the hills, mountains, or jungles, and fought a bloody and brutal campaign behind the invading forces' lines. It was not uncommon to see a patrol leaving the camp and then sending out another to find it, only to have half of the second patrol return with disturbing stories of decapitated heads on spikes and the local civilians doing indescribably horrible things to the dead soldiers. Then there was the chemical weapons, something the locals produced and used gratuitously on the invaders, something called sarin gas, an odorless nerve agent. Those who did not die suffered horrible neurological damage. The locals firebombed occupied cities, poisoned their own land, placed landmines everywhere, and in many other fashions committed terrible things to resist the invaders, who followed every rule of war to the letter. Once the invasion was driven off, the human race of Terra used captured, reverse-engineered ships to travel about the Sol system and built military bases, hideouts, defensive positions, and various other things, many of which were in violation of law. The Intergalactic Commission on War Crimes sent envoys to Terra, where the locals were busy rebuilding. The locals were astounded to be considered criminals. In their eyes, the entirely legal invasion as sanctioned by Section 387.2, paragraph 122 of intergalactic law was a terrible evil which had to be defeated at all costs. The Commission was even more astounded when the locals refused to hand over their leaders to be tried for war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against the sanctity of life. To the humans, the people who had held them together during the war were not criminals, but heroes. People who had ensured the independence of their little world. In response, the Commission issued the entirety of the Sol system a blockade and put strict laws in place to ensure that the system would under no circumstances receive trade or aid from other spacefaring races. Furthermore, as a rogue nation, it was perfectly legal for any race to invade the system. Of course, given that the human race had managed to break every single law about warfare during one single invasion, it meant that there weren't many takers. And since Terra had no trade at all, being an autarky in terms of resources and supplies, the blockade had little to no effect on them. But what it did do was spread the word about the little bloodthirsty world with tons of illegal weapons, chemical, ballistics, biological, even atomic ones. And not everyone follows the laws. The first aliens to smuggle tech and resources to the humans was a small slip cruiser, crewed mostly by members of the Black Star movement, a group with many similarities to anarchists on Earth. They found that while Terra was still in the claws of governments, it was perfectly willing to sell them weapons in exchange for tech, medicine, and resources needed to rebuild the Earth. Soon came certain interest groups, such as the Sariokian Pentastar Syndicate, who were quite impressed with human capacity for war and the weaponry. Soon came the Arcorvi Shadow Traders Guild, who found many Terran inventions to be quite useful in their trade, and paid for weapons and certain plants of the family Erythroxylaceae. Eventually, enterprising young Terrans found employment with these organizations who, respectful of the human capacity for bloody-minded violence, made the choice not to ply their trade on Terra, which, considering the already existing syndicates, families, and associations, was probably a wise choice. Soon, human enforcers could be found in the employ of various organizations on the intergalactic black market. Humans, armed with human tenacity and viciousness, earned a reputation for being well-educated, affable, and often capable of killing the people who went against them using nothing except for their own fists. It wasn't unusual to see two humans, covered head to toe in blood, conversing about the deeper meaning of life or the intricacies of ancient poetry. The intergalactic officials tried to enforce more restrictions on Terra, but given that the entire Sol system was armed to the teeth and could withstand anything short of a combined intergalactic military intervention, or a direct hit from a Nicole Dyson beam, a weapon made immediately illegal when the concept was learned, and is one of the few weapons which even the criminals believe is too horrible. On Terra itself, humanity prospered. The wealth brought home by various mercenaries, former soldiers discharged after the invasion usually, had made the human race able to rebuild their world and give it the level of wealth and security that previously only was possible for the top 10 most developed nations to have. Mars had been terraformed, and while experts said that in a few million years the planet would revert, for humanity it was enough. The Jovian moons were being settled, as was the moons of Saturn. And while the criminal elements didn't dare to infest the human system, they did find themselves able to walk around freely without having to hide with camouflaging tech to prevent themselves from getting caught. Terra became a place where criminal elements of the galaxy settled down after retirement, where they sent their children to go to school and where they could hide if things went south. And the humans, with open arms, damned to be outcasts for defending themselves with everything they had, welcomed their criminal friends with open arms. Terra stood with her torch held high and took in the criminal masses, yearning to live outside of prisons, took in the failed revolutionaries on the run from countless worlds, exiled governments endlessly plotting to retake their lost worlds, along with many other exiles and outcasts.